I learned that morning, staring at a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door, that the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association had officially lost its mind. They were fining me $250 for the unforgivable crime of shoveling snow from my driveway into my own front yard. My own yard. The letter, signed by the HOA president Barbara Jennings, cited Section 12.7 of the Community Guidelines, which apparently stated that accumulation of snow in visible lawn areas creates an unsightly appearance detrimental to property values. I'm Xavier, and I'd been living in this development outside of Burlington, Vermont for 3 years. I'd bought the place after my divorce, looking for somewhere quiet to reset my life. The house was modest, a 2-bedroom ranch at the end of Maple Grove Lane, which despite its charming name was really just a private road that served exactly 6 houses. My property was the last one, backing up against state forest land. The development itself had maybe 40 homes total, all built in the late 90s with that cookie-cutter suburban aesthetic that screamed, "We used the same 3 floor plans for everything." What made my situation special, or cursed depending on how you looked at it, was that I owned a commercial snow plow. I'd bought it 5 years ago when I was still married and had delusions of starting a side business. That never happened, but I'd kept the truck and the plow attachment because it was already paid off, and honestly, I enjoyed using it. There's something satisfying about clearing a path through 2 feet of fresh powder, watching the white stuff cascade to the side in perfect arcs. For the past 3 winters, I'd been doing the neighborhood a favor. Maple Grove Lane wasn't maintained by the town since it was a private road, which meant the HOA was responsible for snow removal. Rather than hire a professional service, they'd been letting me clear the entire street in exchange for waiving my annual HOA dues of $800. It was a fair deal. I enjoyed the work. They saved money on contracted services, and everyone got to leave their houses after a storm. But this violation notice changed everything. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number. It rang 4 times before Barbara picked up. "Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. This is Barbara." "Barbara, it's Xavier from 42 Maple Grove. I need to talk about this violation notice." Her voice took on that particular tone of false sweetness that made my jaw clench. "Oh yes, Harrison. I was wondering when you'd call. The notice was posted this morning per our standard procedures. You're fining me for putting snow in my own yard." "That's correct. As I'm sure you're aware, the community guidelines clearly state—" "I read what it says," I interrupted. "But we're talking about snow. Snow that falls from the sky. Snow that's going to melt in a few weeks anyway. Where exactly am I supposed to put it when I clear my driveway?" "That's not really the HOA's concern, Harrison. Many residents use their backyards for snow accumulation, or they hire professional services that remove it from the property entirely." I pressed my fingers against my temple, feeling a headache building. My backyard backs up to a steep slope. It's not practical to pile snow there, and professional services don't remove snow from properties, Barbara. They push it to the edges, just like I do. Nevertheless, the board voted on this matter last week, and the decision was unanimous. The snow piles are unsightly, and we've received complaints from your neighbors about the appearance of your property. Complaints from who? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. The point is, the fine has been issued and you have 30 days to pay. If you accumulate 3 violations within a calendar year, we can place a lien on your property. My grip tightened on the phone. "And what about clearing Maple Grove Lane? We had an arrangement." "Yes, about that." I could practically hear her shuffling papers. The board has decided to formalize our snow removal procedures. We'll be contracting with a professional service starting immediately. Your dues waiver is hereby revoked, and you'll need to pay the standard annual fee. You should receive that notice within the week. Let me get this straight. You're fining me, ending our arrangement, and now I have to pay full dues. That's correct. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I thought about arguing further, but I recognized a brick wall when I was talking to one. No, Barbara, I think you've been plenty helpful. I hung up before she could respond. The thing about Barbara Jennings was that she'd only been HOA president for about 6 months, having taken over after the previous president moved to Arizona. She was 52 years old, drove a white Lexus SUV that was always spotless, and had the kind of haircut that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her husband Richard was some kind of financial consultant who traveled constantly, which left Barbara with apparently unlimited time to dedicate to making the neighborhood conform to her vision of suburban perfection. I'd heard through the local gossip chain that she'd retired early from a career in corporate human resources, which explained a lot about her management style. Everything was by the book, every interaction was documented, and God help you if you violated protocol. Standing on my front porch, I looked out at my yard. The snow piles she was so offended by were maybe 4 feet high and took up a strip of lawn about 10 feet wide along the driveway. In a few weeks, when the temperature rose, they'd melt and water my grass. It was the most natural thing in the world. But apparently, natural wasn't good enough for Pine Ridge. The next snowfall came 3 days later. I woke up on Saturday morning to find another 10 inches had fallen overnight, with more coming down steadily. By 8 in the morning, Maple Grove Lane was completely impassable. The snow was deep enough that even my Jeep would have struggled to get through without the plow. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen window, watching the snow accumulate. My plow truck was in the garage, fueled and ready to go. It would take me maybe 45 minutes to clear the whole street, but I didn't move. At 9:30, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my neighbor from 3 houses down, Marcus Williams, standing there in a heavy winter coat and boots. "Hey, Harrison, you planning to plow today?" "I've got to get to work by noon. They're short-staffed at the hospital." Marcus was an X-ray technician at the University of Vermont Medical Center. Good guy, kept to himself mostly, always waved when we passed each other. "Sorry, Marcus, I can't help you today." His eyebrows went up. "What do you mean? Is the plow broken?" "Nope. The plow works fine, but the HOA terminated our arrangement. They said I'm not supposed to be doing it anymore. They hired a professional service." "They what? When did this happen?" I showed him the violation notice. He read it twice, shaking his head. "This is insane. You've been clearing the street for years. So when's this professional service showing up?" "No idea. You'd have to call Barbara." Marcus pulled out his phone right there and dialed. I could hear it ringing on speaker. "You've reached the Pine Ridge HOA office. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, please leave a message and someone will return your call within 2 business days." He hung up, frustrated. 2 business days. It's Saturday morning and we're snowed in. "Welcome to the new Pine Ridge," I said. By noon, I had 3 more neighbors at my door. Jennifer and Tom Chen from next door with their 2 kids, asking when I'd be plowing. Gary Patterson, a retired accountant from the house directly across from mine, wanting to know why the street wasn't clear yet. And Sandra Mitchell, who lived in the first house on the lane, the one closest to the main road, who was nearly in tears because she needed to pick up her mother from a nursing home for a birthday dinner. I explained the situation to each of them, showed them the notice, gave them Barbara's number. By early afternoon, I'd learned through the neighborhood text chain that multiple people had tried reaching Barbara, Richard, and every board member they could find. Nobody was answering. The HOA website listed an emergency number for situations like burst pipes or fire hazards, but snow removal apparently didn't qualify. Sunday morning brought another 4 inches of snow. Maple Grove Lane now looked like an untouched winter wonderland, if winter wonderlands came with increasingly angry residents. The main roads in town had been plowed, so people could see freedom just 200 yards away at the end of our private lane. They just couldn't reach it. Gary Patterson tried to drive out in his Buick sedan. I watched from my window as he made it maybe 30 feet before getting completely stuck, his wheels spinning uselessly. It took 4 of us to dig him out and push the car back to his driveway. Monday morning, Barbara finally returned calls. I know because Jennifer Chen called me afterward, furious. She said the snow removal service will get to us when they get to us, Jennifer practically shouted into the phone. They're prioritizing main roads and larger developments first. It could be Wednesday or Thursday. That's 4 days snowed in, I said. I know. Tom had to call in sick to work. The kids are going stir crazy, and you know what Barbara said when I told her this was unacceptable. She said maybe we should all invest in more appropriate vehicles for Vermont winters. Can you believe that? I could, actually. It sounded exactly like something Barbara would say. Tuesday afternoon, a silver Ford Focus came crawling down Maple Grove Lane, somehow managing to navigate the increasingly packed snow. It pulled up to Gary's house, and I watched as a young woman in business attire tried to walk to his door, sinking knee-deep with each step. She gave up after 5 feet and called him instead. I saw Gary come to the window, shake his head, and the woman retreated to her car. Later, Gary told me she was from the Vermont Department of Health, trying to do a routine home inspection for his foster care license renewal. He'd been a licensed foster parent for 12 years, taking in teenagers who needed temporary placement. The failed inspection meant his license would lapse, and he'd have to restart the entire certification process. I tried explaining to Barbara that this was affecting my livelihood, Gary said that evening. We were standing in my driveway, both of us bundled against the cold. She said that personal business concerns don't override community standards. She's really committed to this position, I said. Can't you just plow? Even if they don't want the arrangement anymore, just do it as a neighbor helping neighbors. I've been thinking about that, honestly. It would be easy enough, but every time I considered it, I thought about that violation notice. $250 for putting snow in my own yard, the dismissive tone in Barbara's voice, the casual way she'd torn up 3 years of good faith cooperation. I could, I said slowly. But they fine me for how I plow. If I do it now and I pile snow anywhere Barbara doesn't like, that's another violation. 3 violations and they can lien my house, Gary. I can't risk that. He nodded reluctantly. I get it. This is just such a mess. Wednesday morning marked 5 days since the last major snowfall. The temperature had stayed consistently below freezing, so nothing was melting. Maple Grove Lane was a solid packed sheet of snow and ice, with trenches carved where people had tried to walk through it. Tom Chen, apparently at his wit's end, called a private snow removal company directly and offered to pay out of pocket. The company quoted him $400 to plow just Maple Grove Lane, since it was a private road requiring special liability insurance. Tom agreed, desperate to get back to work. The plow truck showed up at 2 in the afternoon. I watched from my window as it made a single pass down the street, clearing a narrow path. The driver did exactly what I always did, pushing the snow to the sides of the road. The difference was, He pushed it onto the lawns of the houses along the street, mine included. 40 minutes after the truck left, Barbara's white Lexus came crawling down the newly cleared lane. She stopped in front of my house. I watched through the window as she took photographs of my property with her phone, specifically the snow piles that the professional service had just created in my yard. These piles were bigger than what I'd been fined for, pushed there by a driver who'd never seen the property before and didn't care about the landscaping underneath. My phone rang 15 minutes later. Unknown number. Hello, Harrison Xavier. This is Barbara Jennings. I'm calling to inform you of another violation. Snow accumulation in your front yard exceeds acceptable limits per section 12.7. I let the silence stretch out for a moment. Barbara, I didn't put that snow there. The plow service that Tom hired did that. The condition of your property is your responsibility, regardless of how it occurred. You have 48 hours to remove the snow or face an additional fine. Where exactly am I supposed to put it? Again, that's not the HOA's concern, but I'd suggest you figure it out quickly. This will be your second violation. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about control. Barbara had decided that I was a problem that needed to be managed, and she was going to use every rule in the book to make her point fine. Two could play that game. I called Tom Chen. Hey, Tom, I need you to do something for me. Call that plow company back and cancel any future services for Maple Grove Lane. What? Why? Harrison, we need to be able to get out. Just trust me. Can you do it? He hesitated. They're scheduled to come back after the next snow. They said they could put us on a regular route. Cancel it. Please? Okay, but you better have a plan. I did, actually, or at least the beginning of one. That evening, I drove into Burlington and visited an attorney's office. Sarah Feldman specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her website said she offered free initial consultations, which was good because my budget was tight after the divorce. Her office was in a converted Victorian house near the university. Sarah herself was maybe 40, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't waste time on nonsense. I laid out the whole situation. The violation notices, the terminated snow removal arrangement, the impossible standards for where snow could be placed during a Vermont winter. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. Okay, she said when I finished. First thing, this violation they issued you is likely unenforceable. Vermont courts have consistently held that HOAs need to be reasonable in their restrictions, especially concerning natural weather conditions. You can't be expected to keep your property completely free of snow during winter. That's absurd. So I can fight the fine, you can, and you'd probably win, but it'll cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself, which I suspect they're counting on. These things are designed to be annoying enough to modify behavior but small enough that fighting back isn't worth it financially. What about the snow removal situation? They had an agreement with me and they just canceled it. Sarah tapped her pen against the pad. That's trickier. If the arrangement wasn't in writing, they can terminate it at will. However, here's what's interesting. Maple Grove Lane is a private road, correct, maintained by the HOA, right? And you're the last house on that road. So to access your property, you have to travel the entire length of Maple Grove Lane. Yes. Then the HOA has an obligation to maintain reasonable access to your property. That's not just a courtesy, it's a legal requirement. If they're not providing adequate snow removal, they're potentially in breach of the covenants that govern the community. I leaned forward. So what can I do? Document everything. Take photos of the road conditions. Keep records of when you can and can't access your property. Note any impacts to your life, work, safety, whatever. If they continue to provide inadequate service, you'd have grounds to file a complaint and potentially sue for damages. How long would that take? Months, maybe a year, and again, legal fees would be substantial. I slumped back in the chair. So basically, I'm stuck. Not necessarily, Sarah smiled slightly. There's another approach. Sometimes the best way to deal with an unreasonable HOA is to make them face the consequences of their own rules. They want to micromanage snow placement. Fine. Let them handle all the snow removal themselves, exactly as they've insisted. They want professional services only. Hold them to that standard. Eventually, either they'll realize their approach isn't working, or other residents will put enough pressure on the board to force a change. That sounds like it could take all winter. It might. But you'd be surprised how quickly HOA boards change their tune when they're getting angry calls from every homeowner in the development. I left her office with a clearer sense of direction, even if that direction was essentially wait and document. It wasn't satisfying, but it was something. The next snowfall came Thursday night, another 8 inches of heavy, wet snow. By Friday morning, Maple Grove Lane was impassable again. The narrow path that Tom's plow service had cleared was completely buried. This time, the calls to Barbara started immediately. I know because several neighbors copied me on their emails to the HOA board, documenting their attempts to reach someone about snow removal. Jennifer Chen's email at 8:30 in the morning. Our children have missed 3 days of school this month due to inability to access the main road. This is unacceptable. When will snow removal occur? Gary Patterson at 9:15. I have been unable to receive essential mail delivery for 6 days. The Postal Service will not traverse the unplowed road. This constitutes interference with federal mail service. Sandra Mitchell at 10. My mother is in poor health and I am her primary caregiver. I have been unable to visit her since Sunday. If something happens to her because I cannot reach her in an emergency, the HOA will be hearing from my attorney. Marcus Williams at 11. I have used all available sick time and am now missing work without pay. This directly affects my family's income and financial stability. The responses from Barbara came in the early afternoon, all virtually identical. The HOA has contracted with a professional snow removal service. They are aware of the situation and will address it as their schedule permits. Thank you for your patience. No timeline. No apology. No acknowledgement that people's lives were being seriously disrupted. Friday evening, Marcus knocked on my door again. This time he wasn't alone. Tom and Jennifer Chen were with him, along with Gary and Sandra. We need to talk, Marcus said. I invited them in. My living room wasn't really big enough for 6 people, so we ended up standing in a loose circle between the couch and the kitchen. This can't continue, Jennifer said. Harrison, we know you've been screwed over by the HOA, but we're all suffering here. Isn't there some way you can plow, just until we can get this sorted out? I'd been expecting this conversation. I understand everyone's frustrated, but here's the problem. The HOA has issued me 1 violation already. They called me with a 2nd violation for snow that I didn't even put there. If I plow now and Barbara decides she doesn't like where the snow ends up, that's my 3rd violation. 3 violations means they can put a lien on my house. I could literally lose my home. Would they really do that? Tom asked. You want to bet my house that they wouldn't. Because I've seen nothing from Barbara that suggests she's reasonable or willing to compromise. Sandra spoke up, her voice tight with emotion. So we're supposed to just sit here and wait. Some of us have responsibilities, Harrison. real obligations to other people. I know that. But I also have an obligation to protect my own property. If you were in my position, would you risk your home? Nobody answered right away. Finally, Gary said, "What if we all went to the next HOA board meeting, made our complaints official? There's 5 of us here and I know others are upset too." "When's the next meeting?" I asked. Tom pulled out his phone and checked the HOA website. "Next Thursday, 6 p.m. at the community center." "That's 6 days away," Jennifer said. "We can't wait 6 more days." "Then call Barbara," I said. "Call her every day. Call every board member. Make it clear that this is affecting your lives and you won't accept it. But understand that I can't be the solution here." They made sure of that when they fined me. The group left looking unhappy, but I think they understood. Or at least, they understood that I wasn't going to change my mind. Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of shouting outside. I looked out to see Richard Jennings, Barbara's husband, standing in the street arguing with Tom Chen. This was the first time I'd seen Richard in months. He was usually just a figure glimpsed getting into his BMW at odd hours, on his way to or from the airport. I opened my window slightly to hear better. "Completely unreasonable expectations," Richard was saying. "Do you have any idea how many properties the snow removal company has to service? They have a list, they follow a schedule, they'll get here when they get here." "It's been a week," Tom shouted back. "A week. My wife and I have both missed work. Do you even understand what that means for us financially? That's not the HOA's problem. You chose to live on a private road. That comes with certain realities. The HOA maintains this road. That's literally in our covenant documents. You have an obligation to keep it passable. And we've hired a service. The fact that they're busy doesn't constitute a breach of obligation." Jennifer appeared in their doorway, still in her bathrobe. "Richard, we paid our HOA dues specifically for services like this. What exactly are we paying for if not road maintenance?" "Your dues cover a wide range of community services and amenities," Richard said, his tone becoming more condescending. "Snow removal is just one small part of that." "What other amenities?" Jennifer demanded. "We don't have a pool, we don't have a clubhouse, we have a small community center that's open maybe twice a month." "Where is our money going?" "The HOA's financial details are available to any member who requests them through proper channels. You can submit a formal request at the next board meeting. The meeting that we can't get to because the road is impassable." Tom's voice was rising. "Do you see the problem here?" Richard pulled out his phone. "I'm not going to stand here and be shouted at. If you have concerns, put them in writing and submit them to the board." He turned and walked back toward his house, which was on the main road in the development, nowhere near Maple Grove Lane. Tom looked like he wanted to follow him, but Jennifer put a hand on his arm. I closed my window and sat back, thinking. Richard's dismissive attitude explained a lot about Barbara. They were a matched set, 2 people utterly convinced of their own correctness and unwilling to consider that they might be wrong. The weekend passed in a tense standoff. Saturday night brought another few inches of snow, just enough to make the already bad conditions worse. Sunday morning, I watched Sandra Mitchell try to walk out to the main road carrying 2 bags of groceries. She made it about halfway before she slipped and fell hard on the packed snow. Gary and I both rushed out to help her up. She was crying when we reached her, though whether from pain or frustration or both, I couldn't tell. Her knee was already swelling and she'd torn her winter coat on the ice. "I just need to get to my car," she sobbed. "I just need to see my mother." "Is that too much to ask?" Gary and I helped her back to her house. She was limping badly. I suggested she get the knee looked at, but she shook her head. "How am I supposed to get to urgent care? I can't walk to my car, and even if I could, it's buried in snow. I ended up calling a neighbor from the main part of the development who had a truck with four-wheel drive. He was able to get down Maple Grove Lane with some difficulty, and he drove Sandra to the medical center. Turned out, she'd fractured her kneecap. They put her in a brace and gave her crutches, which were going to be absolutely useless navigating the snowy, icy obstacle course our street had become. Monday morning, Gary called Adult Protective Services. I found out about it when two state workers showed up in a four-wheel drive state vehicle, struggling down Maple Grove Lane to inspect Sandra's living situation. They were concerned that the road conditions were preventing her from accessing essential services and caring for her elderly mother. The workers took statements from Sandra, then knocked on doors talking to other residents. When they got to me, I told them everything. The HOA situation, the terminated snow removal arrangement, Barbara's violations against me, the whole story. The younger worker, a woman named Patricia, took detailed notes. This is a concerning situation. The HOA has an obligation to maintain safe access to all properties. If they're not meeting that obligation, there could be liability issues. I've been documenting everything, I said. Photos, emails, phone records. Good. Keep doing that. We're going to file a report and someone from the state may follow up. In the meantime, is there any way to get this road cleared? I have the equipment to do it myself, I said. But the HOA has specifically told me not to, and they've fined me for how I handle snow removal. If I do it now, they could place a lien on my property. Patricia and her colleague exchanged looks. That seems retaliatory, the other worker, an older man named James, said. You might want to consult with an attorney about that. Already have. She says I'd probably win any legal challenge, but it would cost more than it's worth. Unfortunately, that's often how these things work. James shook his head. We'll do what we can from our end, but HOA disputes are usually civil matters. Unless someone's in immediate danger, there's not much the state can do to force their hand. After they left, I called Sarah Feldman and updated her on the situation. She was particularly interested in Sandra's injury and the Adult Protective Services visit. That strengthens your position significantly, she said. If the state is documenting inadequate access, that's evidence of the HOA failing in its basic obligations. Keep me posted, especially if any other residents are injured or have significant damages because of the road conditions. Tuesday morning brought a break in the weather. Sunny skies, temperatures climbing into the high 30s. The snow started to melt, slowly, turning Maple Grove Lane into a slushy, muddy mess that was somehow even harder to navigate than the packed snow had been. Water pooled in the deeper ruts, then refroze at night into treacherous ice sheets. Jennifer Chen's minivan slid on one of these ice patches Tuesday afternoon and ended up in the drainage ditch on the side of the road. She wasn't hurt, but the van was stuck at a 45-degree angle, and it took a tow truck 3 hours to reach us and winch it out. The bill was $600, which her insurance wouldn't cover because she'd been driving on a private road during hazardous conditions, her policy considered avoidable. That evening, Jennifer posted the tow truck bill on the neighborhood's social media page with a simple message. Thank you, Pine Ridge HOA, for this lovely expense. Who else has HOA-related bills to share? The responses came flooding in. Tom posted a screenshot of his payroll showing 2 days of missed work, $700 in lost income. Gary posted documentation of his lapsed foster care license and a letter from the state saying he'd need to complete a new round of home inspections and training, over $1,000 in fees. Marcus posted his own lost wages, nearly $900 and counting. Sandra posted a photo of her fractured kneecap X-ray and a medical bill for $1,800, with her insurance co-pay. The total damages, just among the 6 houses on Maple Grove Lane, were already approaching $6,000, and we were only halfway through winter. Wednesday afternoon, Barbara posted a response on the social media page. The HOA understands that winter weather creates challenges for all residents. However, individual choices regarding vehicle capability, work arrangements, and personal activities are not the responsibility of the association. Residents are encouraged to plan ahead for seasonal weather conditions. The HOA has fulfilled its obligations by contracting professional snow removal services and cannot be held liable for the timing of those services. The post was locked so nobody could comment directly, but that didn't stop people from creating new threads ripping her response apart. Plan ahead for seasonal weather. It's Vermont. We all plan for snow. What we didn't plan for was the HOA abandoning its basic responsibilities. My individual choice was trusting that the HOA would maintain the roads like they're supposed to. Silly me. Notice how Barbara lives on a street that gets plowed by the town, not the HOA. Easy to be dismissive when you're not affected. The community was turning against the board, but Barbara seemed completely unmoved by it. Or maybe she was just that stubborn. Either way, Thursday's board meeting was shaping up to be interesting. I arrived at the community center at 5:45, wanting to get a seat. The building was a simple rectangular structure with a meeting room, a small kitchen, and bathrooms. It could hold maybe 50 people comfortably. By 6 o'clock, there were at least 70 people crammed inside, with more standing in the hallway. I'd never seen turnout like this for an HOA meeting. Usually, these things drew maybe 10 people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Barbara sat at the front table with 4 other board members. Richard, who was the treasurer, Deborah Lancaster, the secretary, Paul Monroe, a member-at-large, and Vivian Mason, another member-at-large. They all looked uncomfortable with the crowd size, except Barbara, who maintained her usual composed expression. She called the meeting to order at 6 sharp, going through standard procedural items. Approval of last month's minutes, financial report, ongoing business. She was clearly trying to run the meeting as normally as possible, ignoring the elephant in the room. When she got to the open comment period, 30 hands shot up. "We'll take comments in an orderly fashion," Barbara said. "Please state your name and address for the record." Each speaker has 3 minutes. Marcus Williams was first. He stood and turned to address the room as much as Barbara. Marcus Williams, 26 Maple Grove Lane. I want to know why our street has been effectively impassable for over a week. I've lost income. My neighbors have been injured and incurred major expenses, and the HOA's only response has been to tell us to be patient. That's unacceptable. When will Maple Grove Lane receive adequate snow removal service? Barbara consulted her notes. The contracted service has Maple Grove Lane scheduled for their next available opening, which should be within the next few days. That's what you said last week. Weather conditions have created high demand for snow removal services throughout the area. The company is working through their client list as quickly as possible. Why did you terminate the arrangement with Harris and Xavier? Marcus asked. He was clearing the street promptly after every snowfall. Everyone on our street was satisfied with the arrangement. Mr. Xavier was not properly licensed or insured to provide commercial snow removal services. Using him exposed the HOA to potential liability. The board made the responsible choice to contract with a legitimate business. This was news to me. I'd never heard anything about licensing or insurance before. I raised my hand. Barbara reluctantly acknowledged me. Harrison Xavier, 42 Maple Grove Lane. Barbara, you just said I wasn't licensed or insured. That was never mentioned before. In 3 years, nobody ever asked about my insurance or licensing. This seems like a post hoc justification for a decision that was really about something else. The board became aware of potential liability issues and acted accordingly. When? When exactly did you become aware of these issues? She shuffled papers. I don't have that information in front of me. Convenient. So you can make claims about why you terminated our arrangement, but you can't provide any specifics or documentation. Mr. Xavier, you're out of order. You've exceeded your 3 minutes. I barely spoke for 1 minute. Nevertheless, we need to hear from other residents. Please sit down. The meeting continued like that for over an hour. Resident after resident stood up to complain about snow removal, about the lack of communication from the board, about the dismissive responses to legitimate concerns. Jennifer Chen presented her tow truck bill and demanded to know if the HOA would reimburse her. Barbara said no, that would be inappropriate use of HOA funds. Gary Patterson asked about emergency access to Maple Grove Lane. What if there's a fire? What if someone has a heart attack? Emergency vehicles can't get down our street in current conditions. Paul Monroe, one of the at-large board members, actually looked concerned at this. That's a valid point. Barbara, shouldn't emergency access be a priority? Emergency services have 4-wheel drive vehicles, Barbara said. They can navigate challenging conditions. I'd like to hear that from the fire department, Gary said. Can we get an official statement from them about whether they consider Maple Grove Lane safe to access? That's outside the scope of this meeting, Barbara said. Then I'm formally requesting that the board obtain such a statement and share it with residents. If emergency services can't safely access our homes, that's a critical safety issue. Vivian Mason, the other at-large member, nodded. I agree with that request. Barbara, can we make that happen? Barbara looked annoyed. Fine. I'll contact the fire marshal's office. The meeting finally wrapped up around 8:30 with nothing really resolved. The board had made no commitments except to continue monitoring the situation and to work with the snow removal company to prioritize Maple Grove Lane. As people filed out, I heard plenty of angry muttering. Several residents approached me to ask again if I could just plow the street. I gave them the same answer as before. Until the HOA backed off the violations and made it clear I wouldn't be penalized, I couldn't take that risk. Friday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it might be Barbara with another violation, but curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Xavier, this is Fire Marshal Dennis Cooper with the Burlington Fire Department. I understand you're a resident of Pine Ridge Development. That's right. I received a call from your HOA yesterday asking me to assess emergency access conditions on Maple Grove Lane. I drove out there this morning to take a look. Mr. Xavier, I'm going to be blunt with you. That road is not safe for emergency vehicle access in its current condition. If we got a call to that street right now, we'd have serious difficulty getting equipment through, and we'd be putting our personnel at risk trying. My stomach tightened. What does that mean for us? It means the HOA needs to clear that road immediately. I'm sending them an official notice today. They have 72 hours to remediate the situation, or I'll be forced to post the street as inaccessible, which means emergency services will not respond to calls at those addresses. Wait, what? You wouldn't send anyone if we called 911. We'd respond to the nearest accessible point and residents would need to come to us, or we'd have to arrange alternative transport. It's not ideal, but we can't send our trucks down roads that might get them stuck or damaged. That puts everyone at greater risk. How is that legal? It's in the state fire code. Property owners are responsible for maintaining access for emergency vehicles. In a standard municipality, that would be the town's responsibility. But Maple Grove Lane is private property maintained by your HOA. That makes them responsible. After he hung up, I immediately called Sarah Feldman and told her about the conversation. "Okay, this just got a lot more serious," she said. "If the fire marshal posts the street as inaccessible, that's a major problem. Properties without emergency service access can have issues with insurance, mortgages, all kinds of things. The HOA is going to have to act now." "Good. Harrison, I want you to be prepared for what comes next. When organizations like HOAs get backed into corners, they sometimes lash out. Barbara has been targeting you specifically. If she feels like you're responsible for this escalating, she might double down on the violations or find other ways to create problems for you. What can she really do? More than you might think. HOAs have broad powers under their covenants. She could fine you for other violations, real or imagined. She could deny approval for any exterior changes to your property. She could make your life difficult in a lot of petty ways. I'm not saying that to scare you, just to make sure you're prepared. I'm already prepared." She fired the first shot with that ridiculous snow violation. "I'm just playing defense here." "I know. Just be careful and keep documenting everything." The fire marshal's notice hit the Pine Ridge HOA social media page Saturday morning. Someone had obtained a copy and posted it in full. The key phrase jumped out in bold text. "Failure to remediate within 72 hours will result in Maple Grove Lane being posted as inaccessible for emergency services." The comments section exploded. Residents from all over the development, not just Maple Grove Lane, were furious. People started talking about their property values dropping if part of the neighborhood was officially designated as inaccessible. Others worried about their homeowners' insurance policies. By noon, someone had started an online petition calling for Barbara's removal as HOA president. It got 100 signatures in 3 hours. At 2 in the afternoon, a snow plow truck finally appeared on Maple Grove Lane. Not the contracted service Barbara had hired, but a different company with emergency services painted on the side. They cleared the street in about 30 minutes, doing a thorough job. When they finished, the driver stopped at my house. I went out to talk to him. "You Harrison Xavier?" he asked. "That's me. Fire marshal's office contracted us to clear this road." "They said you'd been doing it before with your own equipment?" "Yeah, for 3 years. He looked at my plow truck sitting in the garage. "Nice setup. Why'd you stop?" I explained the whole situation. He listened, shaking his head. "HOA man, I deal with this stuff all the time." They're more worried about how things look than whether they actually work. "No offense, but your setup is better than what most of these subdivisions have. You know the road, you live here, you've got incentive to do it right. Tell that to Barbara Jennings." "Yeah, I already had that pleasure." She called us this morning having a complete meltdown about the fire marshal's notice. Demanded we come out immediately. Then she tried to negotiate our emergency rate down to standard pricing. "Lady, this is Saturday afternoon. We pulled guys off other jobs. You're paying emergency rates or you're getting posted as inaccessible." She finally agreed. "What's the emergency rate for this job?" $1,200, and that's just for today. If it snows again, she'll have to call us back at the same rate or find someone else willing to prioritize her. I did the math in my head. At that rate, the HOA would burn through their entire annual snow removal budget in just a few storms, and winter was far from over. The driver climbed back in his truck. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Sometimes people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone." After he left, Maple Grove Lane was clear for the first time in over a week. I watched my neighbors tentatively emerge from their houses, like groundhogs checking for spring. Jennifer and Tom loaded their kids into the minivan and drove out, probably just for the joy of being able to leave. Gary got his mail, a pile of packages and letters that the Postal Service had been holding. Sandra's daughter came to visit, helping her mother navigate on crutches. Sunday was quiet. No snow, temperatures in the low 40s, the existing snow melting steadily. I spent the day catching up on work I'd fallen behind on, doing freelance graphic design from home. It was my main income since the divorce, and I'd been too distracted by the HOA drama to focus properly. Monday morning, I found another notice on my door. This one wasn't about snow violations. This one was about excessive vehicles on property. According to the notice, my plow truck violated Section 8.3 of the Community Guidelines, which stated that commercial vehicles may not be stored on residential property in locations visible from the street. The fine was $300. I stared at the notice, feeling my blood pressure rise. The plow truck had been parked in my driveway in the same spot for 5 years. 3 of those years had been while I was actively plowing for the HOA. Nobody had ever said a word about it. I took photos of the truck in my driveway, noting the date and time. Then I took photos of other vehicles in the neighborhood. Gary's F-250 with a ladder rack, clearly a work truck. A landscaper 3 streets over had a trailer with his business name on it. Someone else had a plumbing van. I compiled the photos and sent them to Sarah Feldman with a message. "Barbara's escalating. Advice," she called me within an hour. "This is exactly what I warned you about. She's retaliating. The good news is that retaliation is actionable. The bad news is proving it requires establishing a pattern, and that takes time and documentation. I've got documentation. I've got photos showing other commercial vehicles that aren't being cited. I've got 3 years of history with this truck in the same location without any issues." "That's good. Keep gathering evidence. In the meantime, is there anywhere else you can park the truck? Not because you have to, but because it removes her target." I could park it in the garage, but then I'd have to move my Jeep out to the street. And I guarantee she'd find a violation for that too. Probably. "Harrison, I think it's time to consider filing a formal complaint against the HOA. We can document the retaliation pattern, the inadequate snow removal, the violations that appear to be selectively enforced. It won't be quick and it won't be cheap, but it might be your best option for getting this to stop." "How much are we talking?" "For a full complaint, probably $5,000 to start. If it goes to arbitration or court, could be double that." I thought about my bank account. Thought about the divorce that had already drained my savings. Thought about the freelance income that barely covered my mortgage and expenses. Let me think about it. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, weighing options. I could pay the fines and move the truck, give Barbara what she wanted. But that felt like surrender, and I knew from experience that bullies didn't stop when you gave in. They just asked for more. Or I could fight, rack up legal bills I couldn't really afford, and spend months or years in a battle with the HOA. Meanwhile, Barbara would keep finding new things to cite me for, making my life miserable in 1,000 small ways. There had to be another option. Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from Marcus Williams. "Harrison, we're organizing. Everyone on Maple Grove Lane, plus some folks from other streets who are fed up with how the board is handling things. We're going to demand a special meeting to vote on removing Barbara as president. You interested?" "Definitely. What do you need from me?" "Right now, just show up. We're meeting at Gary's house tonight at 7. Bring any documentation you have about your interactions with Barbara and the board." That evening, Gary's living room was packed with 15 people. Besides the Maple Grove Lane residents I knew, there were several others I recognized from the neighborhood but had never really talked to. Marcus had a laptop set up, showing a spreadsheet. "Okay, here's where we are," Marcus said, standing at the front. "According to the HOA bylaws, we can call a special meeting with a petition signed by 20% of homeowners. That's 8 signatures out of 40 homes. We've already got 6 just in this room." "What happens at the special meeting?" someone asked. "We vote on a motion of no confidence in the current board president. If it passes with a simple majority of attending members, Barbara is removed from her position, and we elect a new president immediately." "Can she fight that?" Jennifer asked. "She can try, but the bylaws are pretty clear. The membership has the power to remove board members. It's democratic." "When can we hold the meeting?" Tom asked. "Once we have the petition signatures, we submit it to the board. They have to schedule the meeting within 30 days. 30 days, Gary said. "That's a long time for things to keep going the way they are." "It's what the bylaws allow, but we can put pressure on them to schedule it sooner." We spent the next hour strategizing. People volunteered to go door to door getting petition signatures. Someone suggested reaching out to the local news media about the situation. Another person proposed filing a complaint with the Vermont Attorney General's office, which had a consumer protection division that handled HOA disputes. By the time the meeting wrapped up at 9, I felt energized in a way I hadn't for weeks. This wasn't just me against Barbara anymore. This was a community standing up for itself. Wednesday morning, I woke to 3 inches of fresh snow. Not a major storm, but enough that Maple Grove Lane needed clearing. I watched from my window as my neighbors assessed the situation. The street was still passable barely, but another storm would create the same problems we just dealt with. My phone rang. Unknown number again. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Xavier, this is Fire Marshal Cooper again. I wanted to follow up on the road conditions out there. I drove by this morning and saw fresh snow. I know the HOA cleared it over the weekend, but I need to emphasize that this needs to be maintained. If conditions deteriorate again, I'll have to reissue my notice." "I understand. I'll pass that along. I also wanted to say, off the record, that I think you got a raw deal here. I've dealt with your HOA president and she's something. If there's anything I can do to help document the situation for you, let me know." "Actually, there is. Would you be willing to provide a statement about the previous road conditions and the response time from the HOA? I may need it for legal purposes." "Absolutely. Give me your email and I'll send you something official." After we hung up, I sent the email address to him and then forwarded his offer to Sarah Feldman. Having the fire marshal on record would strengthen any case we needed to make. The petition was complete by Friday. 23 signatures, well over the required 20%. Marcus submitted it to the board Friday afternoon, delivering it in person to Barbara's house since the HOA office was only open limited hours. She refused to answer the door, though her car was in the driveway and lights were on inside. Marcus ended up leaving the petition in her mailbox and sending her an email with a scanned copy, just to ensure she couldn't claim she never received it. The response came Saturday morning, posted on the HOA website. "The board has received a petition for a special meeting. Per bylaw section 19.4, such meetings must be scheduled within 30 days of receipt." The meeting will be held on February 18th at 6 p.m. at the community center. Agenda items must be submitted in writing no later than 7 days prior to the meeting. February 18th was exactly 30 days away. Barbara was using every minute the bylaws gave her. The next few weeks settled into an uneasy rhythm. It snowed 3 more times, each storm bringing 3 to 6 inches. After each one, Barbara had to call the emergency snow removal service, paying their premium rates. Rumor had it that the HOA's snow removal budget was already completely depleted, and they were pulling from reserves to cover the costs. Meanwhile, I kept receiving violation notices. The commercial vehicle citation was followed by one about yard waste, because I hadn't removed a fallen branch from the edge of my property within 48 hours. Then another about my house numbers not being clearly visible from the street, even though they'd been the same since I bought the place. Each violation came with a fine between $200 and $300. I didn't pay any of them. Instead, I documented each one, took photos showing the supposed violations alongside similar conditions at other properties that weren't being cited, and sent everything to Sarah Feldman. "You're building a very strong retaliation case," she told me, "but you're also racking up fines. They're going to argue that even if some of these are questionable, you still owe the money. Can they actually enforce collection? Eventually, yes. If you don't pay, they can place a lien on your property. If the lien goes unpaid long enough, they can technically force a sale, though that's extreme and rarely happens. More commonly, you'd have to pay off the lien before you could sell or refinance. So I'm stuck with mounting debt I don't think I owe. For now. But if you can prove selective enforcement and retaliation, a court could void the fines entirely. It's a gamble, though. Everything felt like a gamble these days. February 18th finally arrived. I got to the community center at 5:30 to find a line already forming outside. By 6 p.m., the room was absolutely packed, standing room only, with people spilling into the hallway. Someone had brought folding chairs from home to add extra seating. The board sat at their usual front table, but the atmosphere was completely different from the last meeting. Barbara looked tense, her usual composure showing cracks. Richard kept checking his phone. The other board members looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Marcus called the meeting to order. As the petition organizer, he had the right to run this portion of the meeting. "We're here tonight to address a motion of no confidence in HOA President Barbara Jennings. Before we vote, we'll hear statements from both sides. Barbara, would you like to speak first?" She stood, smoothing her jacket. "I'd like to address the rumors and misinformation that have been circulating." The board's decisions regarding snow removal were made in the best interest of the community. Using an unlicensed, uninsured individual for snow removal created liability risks that could have affected every homeowner here. We acted responsibly by contracting professional services. "Those professional services left us stranded for over a week," someone called out. "That was an unusual circumstance due to heavy demand. The company has since adjusted their schedule to prioritize our community. At 3 times the cost of what Harrison was charging," Tom Chen said. "Which is still less than what we'd pay in a single lawsuit if Mr. Xavier had injured someone or damaged property while plowing." I raised my hand. Marcus nodded at me. "Barbara, you've made this claim about insurance several times. Can you provide documentation of when the board became aware of these liability concerns? Because in 3 years, nobody ever mentioned insurance or licensing to me. Not once." She shuffled papers. "The board discussed it in executive session. Those discussions are confidential." "How convenient." So you can make claims about your reasoning, but you don't have to provide any proof. The board doesn't owe you an explanation for every decision we make. Actually, you do, said a voice from the back. A man I didn't recognize stood up. I'm David Kramer. I live on Oak Street. I'm also an attorney specializing in corporate governance. I've reviewed your bylaws, and they're quite clear that the board has a fiduciary duty to act in the membership's best interest and to be transparent about decisions that affect the community. Claiming executive privilege for decisions that clearly impact all members is a misuse of that provision. Barbara's face reddened. Are you suggesting the board acted improperly? I'm suggesting that your decision-making process appears questionable, your communication with members has been inadequate, and your treatment of Mr. Xavier shows evidence of retaliation, all of which are grounds for removal. The room erupted in applause. Barbara tried to speak over it, but Marcus intervened. I think we've heard enough statements. Let's move to the vote. The motion before us is to remove Barbara Jennings as HOA president. All in favor. A forest of hands went up. I counted quickly, estimating at least 40 people voting yes. All opposed, 5 hands. Richard and the 3 other board members, plus one person I didn't recognize who I assumed was a friend of Barbara's. The motion passes, Marcus said. Barbara Jennings is removed as president, effective immediately. The room exploded in cheers and applause. Barbara sat frozen in her chair, looking stunned. Richard put a hand on her arm, but she shook him off and gathered her things. Without a word, she walked out of the meeting, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Okay, everyone, settle down, Marcus said. We need to elect a new president. Nominations. Several names were suggested. Gary Patterson nominated Marcus, and the nomination was quickly seconded. Someone nominated David Kramer, the attorney who'd spoken up, but he declined, saying he'd be happy to serve in an advisory capacity, but didn't want the administrative burden of the president role. The vote for Marcus was nearly unanimous. He took Barbara's seat at the front table, looking a bit overwhelmed. All right, first order of business. Harrison Xavier, can you come up here? I made my way to the front, unsure what was happening. Marcus pulled out a piece of paper. The new board, which I'm declaring consists of everyone who was here before minus Barbara, just had a very quick discussion. We'd like to formally reinstate your arrangement to clear Maple Grove Lane. Same terms as before, snow removal in exchange for waived annual dues. We'll also provide you with a certificate of insurance through the HOA's policy, so there's no question about coverage. Does that work for you? I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Yeah, that works for me. Great. Second order of business. All violation fines issued to Harrison Xavier in the past 60 days are hereby voided. The board acknowledges these were improperly issued and constitute harassment. Harrison, you don't owe the HOA a cent. More applause. I shook Marcus's hand and returned to my seat. The meeting continued for another hour, dealing with other business. The board voted to find a new treasurer since Richard announced he was resigning, citing hostile work environment. David Kramer agreed to review all HOA contracts and expenses to ensure everything was above board and properly managed. When I finally got home at 9:30, I felt exhausted but relieved. It was over. The fight was done, and somehow, we'd won. The next morning, I woke to another 6 inches of fresh snow. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and then went out to my garage. The plow truck started on the first try, engine rumbling to life. I backed it out of the garage and attached the plow blade, checking the hydraulics and making sure everything was working properly. Then I started down Maple Grove Lane, pushing snow to the sides in clean, efficient passes. The morning sun was bright on the white landscape, and the temperature was just cold enough that the snow wasn't too heavy or wet. Perfect plowing conditions. When I reached the end of the lane where it connected to the main road, I saw Barbara standing in her driveway, watching me. Our eyes met for a moment. I couldn't read her expression, couldn't tell if it was anger or resentment or just defeat. I didn't particularly care anymore. I finished the street, made sure every driveway was accessible, and then drove back to my house. Jennifer and Tom were outside with their kids, who were building a snowman. They waved as I passed. Gary was getting his mail, a simple act that had been impossible just weeks ago. Sandra was sitting on her porch with her mother, both of them bundled in blankets, watching the neighborhood come back to life. I parked the truck in my garage and went inside. My phone had several text messages waiting. Marcus, thanks for clearing the street. You're a lifesaver. Jennifer, the kids are so happy to be able to play outside safely. Thank you, Gary. Coffee's on me next time we're at the diner. You earned it. I smiled and set the phone down. Then I started working through my backlog of graphic design projects, trying to rebuild my finances after the chaos of the past month. 3 days later, I got a call from Sarah Feldman. Harrison, I wanted to let you know that Barbara Jennings has filed a lawsuit against the HOA. My stomach dropped. For what? Wrongful termination as president. She's claiming the vote was improperly conducted and that she was denied due process. Is she going to win? Unlikely. The bylaws are clear and the vote was well documented. But it means the HOA will need legal representation, which costs money. I wanted to give you a heads up that you might be called as a witness if it goes to trial. Of course I will. After everything she put me through, I'll happily tell a court exactly what happened. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Barbara's attorney argued that the special meeting was called under false pretenses, that the petition signatures weren't properly verified, that the vote was influenced by misinformation. Every argument was methodically dismantled by David Kramer, who represented the HOA pro bono as a service to the community. In July, a judge finally ruled in the HOA's favor, dismissing Barbara's case and ordering her to pay the HOA's legal fees. The amount was substantial, over $15,000. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that Barbara and Richard were planning to move. Their house went on the market in August, listed at a price that seemed desperate to sell quickly. They were gone by October, relocated to somewhere in Florida where presumably they could find a new community to micromanage. As for me, life returned to normal. I plowed snow the following winter and the winter after that. Marcus proved to be an excellent HOA president, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. The board revised the community guidelines to be more reasonable, removing several of the more ridiculous provisions that Barbara had emphasized. I never did get back the money I'd spent on legal consultations with Sarah, or recover the stress and anxiety of those weeks when I felt like my home was under attack. But I learned something valuable about standing up for yourself, about not backing down when someone tries to bully you into submission. On a cold December morning 2 years after the whole mess started, I was out plowing after an overnight storm. The neighborhood looked beautiful, everything covered in fresh white snow, smoke rising from chimneys, Christmas lights twinkling on houses. I just finished my street when I saw new neighbors moving into Barbara's old house. A young couple with a baby, unloading boxes from a moving truck. I drove over and introduced myself, offering to plow their driveway once they got settled. They were grateful and friendly, excited about their first home purchase. The previous owner didn't leave us much information about the neighborhood, the husband said. Is the HOA pretty active here? I smiled. Used to be. These days, we mostly just handle the basics. Keep the roads clear, maintain common areas, that kind of thing. Pretty low-key. That's exactly what we were hoping for. We looked at some places with really strict HOAs, and it just seemed like too much hassle. Yeah, I agreed. Too much hassle isn't worth it for anyone. I finished plowing their driveway and headed home. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of winter day that makes you remember why you live in Vermont. I parked my truck, went inside, and made hot chocolate. Through my kitchen window, I could see the neighborhood going about its business, people living their lives without fear of violation notices or arbitrary fines. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just being able to live in peace, doing what you've always done, in the place you call home. Barbara learned that lesson the hard way. I just hoped whoever she was bothering in Florida would figure it out faster than we did. The snow kept falling that winter, and I kept clearing it. It was honest work, helping my neighbors, being part of a community that had come together when it mattered most. That's what HOAs were supposed to be about, I realized. Not rules for the sake of rules, not power trips or petty enforcement. Just neighbors helping neighbors, working together to make life a little better for everyone. And if someone tried to take that away again, well, I knew now that I didn't have to fight alone. The whole community would stand with me, just like they did before. That knowledge, more than anything else, made me feel truly home. The plow truck sat in my garage, ready for the next storm. My violation notices were framed and hanging in my office as a reminder of how far we'd come. And every time it snowed, I'd clear that street with a smile, knowing that sometimes the right thing to do is also the most satisfying thing to do. Barbara had tried to fine me for shoveling snow into my own yard. She tried to take away my ability to help my neighbors. She tried to use rules and regulations as weapons to force compliance and punish independence. But in the end, all she'd accomplished was uniting a community against unreasonable authority and teaching us all the value of standing together. I'd stopped clearing their road when they told me I couldn't do it my way. And that simple act of refusal, that decision to let them face the consequences of their own policies, had changed everything. Not because I wanted revenge or to hurt anyone, but because sometimes the only way to show people their mistake is to let them experience it fully. The snow would keep falling in Vermont. Winters would keep coming with their storms and cold and beautiful white landscapes. And I'd be there, plow truck ready, helping my neighbors navigate it all. Not because some HOA board told me to, but because it was the right thing to do. And that made all the difference.